Everybody, welcome to the ConsumerFi podcast. I'm thrilled to be joined by the folks from IDology. We have Algie, who's the National Sales Manager for the consumer finance market. And we have Heidi Hunter, who's the VP of Product Innovation. Welcome to the pod, Tom and Heidi.
Hey, Joel. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, Joel. Nice to be here.
So IDology is a fraud company. Can we maybe we start off by establishing the what y'all do and the value that you create for the people that use your service?
Yeah, absolutely. Tom, you want me to take that one?
Sure, absolutely.
All right. So IDology is an industry-leading provider of identity verification solutions, right? And the type of services that we can offer, they branch across a lot of different markets. We're a very great fit in fintech, financial services, lending. We do a lot in commerce and payments, P2P payments, and work a lot in Silicon Valley. But the platform itself, beyond providing the different KYC and anti-money laundering compliance that's needed to participate in these different markets, we're also a leading edge provider of fraud prevention solutions. And a lot of the solutions that are considered to be kind of top of the line or what you need to be competitive in this market, we were one of the leading providers that actually innovated and created a lot of them. So we're very excited to be with you today and talk about, some of the expertise and things that we've learned over the course of our history with the company.
And Heidi, both you and Tom have been with IDology for a little while, right?
Yeah.
So I'm in for 4 years. I know Heidi's longer.
I'm going to hit my 10-year anniversary in October. So Tom, I'm expecting gifts. You know what I like to drink. So
Right.
Chocolate covered strawberries, maybe. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. I'm a whiskey girl. Tom knows that. Or some Macallan.
Yeah.
Okay. So you like the scotch? You
like the good stuff.
I like the good stuff.
I started drinking the Kentucky bourbon last year, and
I haven't had any of that yet.
Oh man, it's good straight, but yeah. It's I don't do it anymore. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about the history of fraud. So Tom, quite aptly, I met you at Lendit a couple of years ago when we were trying to spin up some of the Fraud Friday curriculum for the National Automotive Finance Association.
Right.
And we have an itch here that we're looking to scratch, and we want to make sure that we get the IDology voice heard. But you guys have been at it for a while, right? So, take us down a little bit of some of the memory lane of like how fraud started and maybe where IDology kind of came into the mix, right? Like at that point in time, what are we talking about? I mean, how old is IDology as a company?
Well, IDology was started in 2003 by our previous CEO, John Dantsu, and some of his business partners, and headquartered here in Atlanta. And the company really grew organically off of a couple of core markets, lending being one of those core markets, and small dollar lending, non-bank lending to boot. Mm-hmm. And then since that time, we've expanded to over 4,500 clients here with enterprises on IDology's install. As Heidi mentioned, we serve probably at least a dozen markets that I could rattle off here.
Sure.
In 2018, we were acquired by GB Group, which is a publicly traded company on the London Exchange. So we're now we're part of a much larger family of companies.
Okay.
But all that time, right, we've been working on fraud as it shifts.
Yeah. And so when IDology first started attacking fraud, what types of fraud were you attacking and what were the solutions?
Yeah. So
Heidi, definitely take that.
Yeah, because I got my start in IDology. I was boots on the ground. I was in the client success department. And at the time, believe it or not, we used to analyze customer statistics to look to improve pass rates, right? That was the focus.
Yeah, right.
Beat KYC, get as many bodies through the door as we can.
That's still a big thing. That's still a big thing in non-prime, although I think the tides, we were discussing this earlier, I think the tides are changing a little bit where folks are saying, I'm taking a little bit more of a conservative point of view.
Correct. And I think the way the mind shift has changed, right, is it's not so much, we still want to approve and drive business, but what we want to do now is find the right customers, right? Find the real customer, right? We're looking for value and we're looking for people that really want to participate with you, as opposed to trying to just drive that business line as high as you can. But in that time frame, we began through the client participation, these different quarterly business reviews that we do, we began to see really concerning trends in the data where we were seeing crossover was how it began, right? So we noticed an identity used to travel. It would begin with one specific type of business line, right? Maybe they'd open a bank account to begin. They'd go to apply for some type of loan. And then we'd see that money get moved through something like P2P, right? P2P transfer into something maybe that's a little bit more movable, like some type of money account or a prepaid card. And then that funding would be gone. And once we would go back and talk to the clients, we would understand that they had seen this happen and it was a repetitive type of activity. So it began for us, we always had tools to spot repetitive activity, right? We had our velocity tools and other things that we utilized to look for this type of behavior. But we really, at that point, once we saw these types of things happening, right? And that was identity theft in its true core. Really started to narrow in on it and start to focus on how to find that in the data. Once we found it in the data, the next question is, okay, from a product standpoint, what do we build to find it on the spot? And this is where our evolution really began.
So in those early days, when you say identity theft, am I talking about getting a hold of another person's PII and then, opening accounts on, under that alias?
That's exactly right. This is, the selling of data on the dark web through data breaches. It's, stealing people's information with phishing attempts, right? It was that in its true form was one of the first forms that we really focused in on. But obviously these fraudsters are very intelligent. This information really evolves. And so now, we're now honed in on, I think we had talked earlier, there's 10 or 15 different types that you have to really be thinking about and trying to focus on, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And for folks that were at the National Automotive Finance Association conference, Tom, I know you were one of them. We had a really compelling talk with Brett Johnson,
right?
The anglerfish came and spoke to us and shared a multitude of state IDs and gave us some kind of guidance on how to protect ourselves. And I'm going to leave that as a teaser. I don't know if you remember, Tom, do you remember the 3 things he said everybody should be doing to protect themselves?
I think I do. So will that be a quiz at the end?
It's going to be a quiz at the end. Let's not forget it. I think I remember that. We'll cobble it together, but I want people to listen to the entire thing. So we're talking about identity theft in the early, or identity, people using identities, aliases to get and establish credit. And this is back when we're still trying to we want to fund every loan. We just, we don't want to turn them down. So then, you start building these defenses, and you talked about creating these velocity measures and other things, Heidi. So then how did it come together? Like, how did these things come together in terms of a solution?
Yeah. So from a platform standpoint, it's honestly, it was pulling threads, right? You find a trend, it's fraudulent data. You start evaluating what tools are in your toolbox that are going to address that, right? So we know so much about an identity based on the data points that we have around it. And you can't just focus on the core attributes that you would for, things like pulling credit or doing identity verification, because in the case of a lot of these fraud patterns, or a lot of these different types of frauds that we're talking about now, it's not sufficient. You got to go deeper. So by doing additional analytics on other pieces of information that we're able to find through all these different sources that we have, we were able to build out statistics to address these different cases, right? And then we expanded that usage to go acquire more sources that give even more insights, right? And through that, we built the platform to have multiple products, vetting data many different ways. But where I think it really gets interesting, Joel, is where you start pulling all that back together and painting a really clear picture, right? And that gets us to where we are today, where we're now the focus is not so much, it is partly finding the fraud and getting it out, but it's also approving the good customers. Because what you don't want to do is just drop a ton of friction on somebody who really just wants to get that loan, right? And go ahead and get their automobile or whatever else it is that they're after.
Yeah, I'd like to throw something in. I agree, Heidi. It's really about, it's not just continuing to collect information, it's getting answers along the way, right? And that's what helps keep friction down while still getting you to your end objective.
Exactly. Because if you can look at it from a positive standpoint, if you can verify against a solution like ours, 15 or 20 different comfort factors and everything looks good, that's a solid customer.
Yeah.
Right? That's someone that's going to be really good for your business and somebody that you want.
Tom, you mentioned that one of the early industries that I'm going to assume, you tell me if I'm right, one of the early industries that IDology had some really good traction in is the non-depository lending or consumer online or branch-based lending. Now those companies are well known in my mind for embracing alternate bureau data very early on and using it as a mechanism to create a way for these individuals that would otherwise be, for whatever reason or another, maybe they wouldn't be approved by a conventional lender. They can go this way because we've pulled in this additional information. Is that additional information that we call it a alternate bureau or whatever the term is that information integral to your solution? And I mean, was that an important factor in terms of building up your fraud models, I guess I'd say?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mentioned that because I'm a little unique. I was a former customer of IDology, so I came from the online lending really at its earliest beginnings there, and you're absolutely correct. The alternative data was embraced by that business model very, very early on because of the reasons you cited. With IDology, certainly we're taking in thousands and thousands of different data sources. Some of those might be considered alternative, but we're not a credit bureau. So
right.
Really, we're not looking at trade lines or potentially, utility payments or what now has come into the vogue of non-standard trade lines that right. A lot of the lenders are leaning into. But when we say data diversity, we truly mean it is thousands and thousands of different data sources that we can call from our system in real time to take the attributes that we've been given and then come up with the right the answers, right? Not just more information, but answers.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I think the alternate bureaus are not so alternate anymore. I think
right.
all the majors are now owned by major bureaus,
right?
And we're just going to see that convergence, just continue as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, we saw it yesterday. Big announcement yesterday.
What was that, Tom? I'm sorry. I was head down all day. I must have missed it.
Neustar was acquired by TransUnion. So you have a very, very large data warehouse there in Neustar being acquired by, one of the big three.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
And does Neustar have a particular footprint or slice of industries that is, of value there? I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with Neustar. So
they have, so I believe, and Tom, keep me honest, they didn't I think they partitioned the company into pieces because Neustar does everything from providing technical services for web-based applications all the way into data services.
Okay.
So parts of it were pulled apart, right? So they have a wide footprint everywhere. You're going to be hard pressed to find many technology companies that are not operating with them in some capacity, but specifically the data side of it.
Yeah.
It's a smart acquisition for TU because they're going to get some really good data through that acquisition that they can bring into their platform. Plus, they've got a pretty good foothold. They're working with a lot of folks on that data side of the house.
Yeah. 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 You have a lot of talented people working in both credit and fraud. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of the techniques and the methods have some similarities, right? You're dealing with statistics, right? So, a lot of times we want to look for a black and white answer, and well, Heidi gave in this information and this is her address and this is all the other stuff. It looks good, but I can't really say it's exactly her, right? You never really can say with 100% certainty, right? So you need people that deal in the world of methods and modeling and statistics and knowing how to kind of translate that to the business person who's using it.
Correct.
That's really important too. And that's something, Tom, that I got to give you kudos. Anytime I talk to you about anything, we even started talking about blockchain and everything out of your mouth was totally understandable. You weren't trying to bash me over the head with all this knowledge that you have that I don't possess, it's nice. I guess, we talked about the history of fraud. We talked about how you all have established some of these defenses. Can we inform people a little bit about the other big areas of fraud, Heidi? we obviously talked about using somebody else's identity, which is identity theft. What are the other ones that kind of grew up, or the ones that are really big today that we need to concern ourselves with?
Yeah, and it really, you're gonna see different types depending on what part of your business you're talking about, right? When we're talking about things like account origination, the beginning of applying for a loan, that's generally going to be your either your stolen identities or this new crop of fraud that most people, it's very buzzy right now, which is the synthetic identity.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's a very long play from a fraud perspective. You've got to be invested, but it's got a really high return if you're willing to hang in there. We actually had our current CEO create herself a synthetic identity. She was able to accomplish it in a few months, which was kind of alarming. So what these fraudsters will do is they'll take valid data attributes, a genuine address, a genuine name. They'll get a hold of a social security number, could be from a child, someone who's elderly. But what they'll do is they'll start applying for things using that information concatenated together, right? Kind of built. And then eventually it'll get itself a footprint. And then where this gets even nastier, to be perfectly honest, is then they'll go apply for something like utilities or a very small credit card. They'll actually make the payments, like they will use this service and they will make good on it so that it builds a credit profile. And then that's when it's solid. At that point, they'll use, and we've even seen where they're selling these off. There's mules now that just sit around and create these, make sure the payments get made, and then they'll go post them on the internet. Synthetic, here's the score, here's what you can do with it. But they'll take that synthetic identity, which looks to be genuine, and they'll start attempting to transact in the market with it, and they will be successful.
Right. We hear about credit washing, right, which is really the process that Heidi just described, and then of course the end goal is the breakout.
Yeah.
I read a statistic that freaked me out a little bit, and I think, Heidi, this is something that everyone should be mindful of, is the amount of data out there on people is just ridiculous. The stat I saw, I think it was from Deloitte or somewhere, it's like 5,200 gigabytes of data for every person on Earth, right? And they're continuing to add daily as we all continue to interact and do things online. So there's so much data out there on individuals now that it's really almost, synthetic identity is just a condition that we're going to have to live with. It's not
a hard problem to solve, because you've got data points that live and have been created at a government level or at a personal level that are never going to be tied to a bureau record. From a standpoint of legitimacy, right?
The bureaus can't
find it in another way.
The bureaus can't be deterministic and just start purging records because they think that's the case, and their hands are tied. That's not a sling at the bureaus. It's just
it's the facts, right? That's the reality.
That's a concept for a lot of lay people that they don't understand. I'll pull my bureau, I'll look at it, and I'll say, "There's all these addresses. I never lived there. I never applied for credit using this address. I don't want it on my bureau anymore, right?" And I want to do it from a protective standpoint, that I don't want somebody who's using it to create a synthetic or whatever. It's using one of my variables. I'm not directly in the path of liability, but I don't want to perpetuate more criminal activity, obviously. So my wife had something like that where there was an additional line on there, and it's been a decade really. She's just been fretting over it, and I said, "Karen, we all have these additional addresses on there. Somebody fat fingered something, or somebody applied and your information got commingled with somebody else's or something, right? Like there are honest mistakes, I think, that happen along the way. So you just don't know, was somebody really screwing with you or not? I'm one of those that thinks, for the most part, I think most of the U.S. consumers, their information has been compromised at least once.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think I was part of one of the big bureau breaches. My university that I went to was part of a big breach. That's my problem.
Been part of that. Yeah.
Well, that's my problem is if you create these breaches, so you got this Experian or Equifax, I forget what the breach was. Apologies if I called your name wrong, but it was one of the big bureaus had a big breach. So there's certain information there, a lot of good information. Then you get my university information in there too. Oh my God, that's really unique data set.
Mhm.
right? So that's the thing that concerns me is I don't want all these disparate data sets being compromised. If you just have my bureau, that's one thing. But once you start layering this stuff in, now these guys are modeling out how to beat you and everyone else, right, with their data.
Mhm.
And we want to have a fair fight. At some point, we want to have a fair fight.
It probably never will be, Joel, but that's why, as you think about, what's important to your business, whether it's partnering with a third party or developing solutions internally, they've got to be flexible. You have to constantly be reassessing the goalpost and moving it as needed, because it's a shifting problem. It'll never be resolved. And the moment that you find something that's very solid, within 24 hours, these guys have adjusted and they've moved to another place. So you just have to be super agile. But I'll tell you, I have the benefit of working with customers on the customer side. There's nothing more satisfying than when they'll make those alterations and it moves away. It's a great feeling to see that at least what they're doing is functioning and working. So there's this silver linings to everything. I try to stay positive about it. But yeah, it's a shifting target. It'll never be resolved, but it is fightable as long as you're agile and you try to stay on the front end of it.
Yeah.
Joel, another thought that we see coming, right? And it's here, it's not coming, is this concept of self-sovereign identity and control, and businesses handling the PII, which you mentioned in terms of breaches and compromised data sets. We know this is coming. We've seen some of the states start to push, like California with the Consumer Protection Act there. People want control back. So you mentioned, oh my gosh, they've got my college data, they've got my bureau, record, or my trade line and bureau. And so I think what we're going to start to do is we're going to have to start doing a business where the consumer has some control back. Joel won't have to provide an entire payload of data. Perhaps he'll have to provide only a few attributes. And then it's up to the business and their tools, their sources, to make sense of that and to make that process click and work. Otherwise, we've just got an impasse. So I think that's coming. The states are giving consumers back some control. I know Heidi would agree, we see that coming, and it'll probably be federal law at some point, where the consumers have more sovereignty over their data. The second thing is as Heidi mentioned, flexibility. If you're dealing with the same problem, which is how do I know that this is Heidi, and I can verify that her information is accurate so that we can do business together, but she hasn't given me a full payload of data or the data that I'm used to getting now. How do I continue to do my job as a fraud prevention or a verification company?
Yeah,
it's something that everyone is going to have to deal with, not just one or two providers, but everyone.
Yeah, that's one of the dreams that I have for the application of blockchain. So the thesis that I hang my hat on is I can own all my PII. That's my information. That is not anybody else. That's mine to own. Yeah. And I will release you only what you need, but that's all in my blockchain locker.
Yeah.
And you say, if you give me one or two more pieces of information, then I can get you approved. Then I have a decision to make. Do I want to share and expose that information with you? I have a big problem with how these social security numbers are just thrown around. And I'm sure it has to do with AML or some other stuff. And I'd like to restrict that, right? I'd like to share less of that and more of what I want to share in order to get through these toll gates. But we're not there, right? We're obviously not there. And this information, all of our PII is like, we don't own it. We ultimately don't own this information. I think when we get to that level of like a digital personal identification type thing, I mean, it can reside on the phone. These things are with us all the time. There's gobs of information that people are getting off of you, off your phone, with you just shopping, just going to a store, driving here, driving. I remember when my phone used to say, when I used to commute to work, it would give me a little notice. It would say, you're driving to the same place you drive every day. It's going to take you 15 minutes. Traffic looks pretty good. And I thought, wow, this is a little obtrusive. Like, I didn't ask for this, right? So you start shutting stuff down on the phone. I mean,
Mine even had my coffee shop location as a pit stop, Joel. That was pretty alarming. It was like, hey, it's 5 minutes to that and then 45 to work after.
Yeah,
So
They know your routine, right? And that's
Yeah.
one of the things that we use on the lender side is knowing that people are creatures of habit. So Tom, if you go to the same gym every Tuesday and Thursday, you probably park in the same parking space. You probably use roughly the same locker, as long as there's not a bunch of naked old dudes standing next to that one that you normally use.
Yikes.
In case you go to the other side, right?
I'm going to wipe that visual out.
Hey, it's the reality, right?
It is.
So, but you're a creature of habit. So, I can start kind of like estimating your whereabouts and your behaviors and obviously market to you. But then also on the flip side, if I need to repossess your car and I have a little bit of that information, that's pretty valuable for me to have, to know that you're going to be in a certain place in a certain time.
So
Heidi,
Joel, think about the positive
behavior.
I'm sorry, Tom.
No, I want to hear what I know. Heidi's got some good stuff here on the behavioral and the biometric stuff.
That's what I was going to say. But this is what I love about the concept of that, if it could be secured, because anything that's not, and I think this is really good, you brought this up, Joel, anything that's not normal or doesn't have history would indicate there's a problem. So wouldn't it be great if, in a sense, your digital identity could be leveraged that way, right? Yeah. As your patterns, as that, it's safely kept inside of the phone. But if there was a way to say, you need to trust this is a real person who's been doing this for 6 years with no changes, they do the same things. That's what when I think about the future of blockchain and digital identity, it's securing your authenticity through that activity, but keeping it as a firewall safely on the device, right? But that the information is there. That's what I'll be curious to see evolve, right?
Yeah. And then from a government regulatory standpoint, I think there's a knee-jerk reaction that that people who are consider themselves to be heavy on the consumer advocacy side would say, we need to protect these individuals. So we need to put all these barriers into place and all these government structures to protect this person at the end of the line.
Right.
And I say, don't build all these meaningless walls of China. Let each person have their own data secured in their own place where they have control over it, right? And they're the ultimate arbiter of whether they want to be loose or they want to be tight with it, right? If you're in a credit deprived situation, you might have to expose more. If you're in a really good situation credit wise, you may be able to run the table by saying, you can pull my credit and that's about it. That's, so I'm a big fan of that. I'm a big fan of putting the control, at that individual standpoint. I don't know. I've got dreams about that, but
I think it'll happen though. I mean, things move quickly in technology. They just do. And I think if we were to have this conversation in 10 years, it'd be a completely different discussion. But again, that's why you have to stay agile, flexible. You have to stay, ahead of the curve so that you're one of the leaders of it, right? Rather than playing catch up. It's hard to play catch up.
Yeah. Tom, I'm going to come back to you. All right. Now it's Brett Johnson anglerfish quiz time.
Yeah.
There were three things that everybody should be doing to protect themselves. This was prescribed by Brett Johnson, the anglerfish.
The anglerfish, and we know the anglerfish pretty well at IDology. He's collaborated with us. Great guy, super
Great
dramatic,
insights.
right?
Yeah.
I have to say, just if anybody, I'm guessing some of the listeners will have been at NAF. You could have heard a pin drop.
You could have.
That guy was talking, and it was a full auditorium. But as I recall, the kind of the things that I took away from Brett's talk is look, the information is out there about fraud and verification and some of the challenges that have happened in the past that are happening now and may come down the line in the future. But Brett's point, his main point was, it's not the stuff that we know about, it's the stuff we don't do anything about, right? So companies need to start doing things. And some of those things are naturally using good tools, finding tools and then using them, not just brushing them off as a that's nice to have, but I'm not going to get it. The other thing is they need to train their people because we know that humans are typically the weakest point in the defense. And then I'm stumped. I can't think of the last thing.
So I've got two of the three I want to see, and then Tom and Heidi, because you guys are experts, you may be able to kind of throw in even more. He said, everybody should put a fraud alert on all of your bureaus for yourself and your family. So I'm thinking about my kids here, right? Put a fraud alert if they have a bureau entity. Get a password locker and use a password locker that creates these complex passwords. I've been using one since I actually got SIM jacked twice. And so, and I do have some cryptocurrency type apps on there. And that's what people are ultimately trying to get to. I'll get a Yahoo email saying somebody tried to change your password from the Netherlands. And then all of a sudden my phone is rendered inoperable. And then I have to call AT&T and scream at them about why they didn't properly vet somebody coming in to buy a new SIM card or doing so online. Right.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, but there was a third one and it's just totally escaping me. And Tom's looking very blank right now.
I am, man. The first two now, that's
I mean, I can add others.
Go ahead. Come on.
I recommend you put a VPN on your cell phone and your home network. Yeah. As a virtual proxy on there. You can have everything that's running across your wires basically encrypted at that point. And if anybody tries to hack your home network, it's going to be really challenging for them to get in. So I recommend that we do that at home. So all of our devices, and we're just buying just a basic service. I don't pay more than $15 a month for it. It's beautiful. So I recommend doing a VPN on all of your devices. I also too would recommend definitely your children are a weak point. Mine have clicked on honeypot and spam sites more than I can count on. So their computer's isolated. It's controlled as best as I can, but it's got its own account. It's not tied to anything else. Like anything that you're going to let your kids be on the web with, I would not let them have a computer that shares access with you, because by 9, they will click and stroke on something that ends up hacking your mail.
Yeah.
And that it's game over. Yeah.
Yeah.
Isolate that off for sure. Yeah. So I would definitely throw that one out there. Those two. Absolutely. The bureau block's a good one.
You mentioned the password manager. He also mentioned that, mix up your passwords, change your passwords regularly. I know we're required to do that, as employees at IDology, because security is so vital for us.
Yeah.
But I think that's just a good habit that I've tried to, convey over to my friends and family.
Right.
Just
have it home.
Mix it up. Don't use the same password, and for sure change up your passwords. Not every month but every couple months. Just make some easy changes for yourself.
Yeah,
that's all good stuff. Well, Heidi and Tom, I think that this has relevance across the entire consumer lending ecosystem. Putting good fraud defenses in place. Obviously, each business may have one business may have more synthetic. Another may have more just kind of stolen identities. What's the best way for folks to get in touch with IDology? And Tom, by the way, I just met Heidi, and I know she's probably the same. I don't want to put words in her mouth, but Tom has been always receptive to having a conversation. So I'm not talking about selling anything. We're talking about the spirit of Fraud Friday from the NAF, making sure people have resources they can tap into. Perhaps you get to a point where there's something you want to buy. That's great, but that's we just want to make sure that we get the thought leadership and the interactions there. So if folks want to get a hold of Tom or Heidi, what's the best way, or IDology, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah. So obviously we have a website, and we would provide that website information. It's pretty simple, www.ideology.com.
Yeah.
We have social media profiles out
LinkedIn.
there.
Feel free to send us LinkedIn
we,
messages. Happy to connect, and
we're posting.
You're right. Yeah,
we're
love
posting
to hear
content.
Okay, so follow IDology on LinkedIn. Find them. It's IDOLOGY.
That's right. We attend a lot of events, and so as you mentioned, Joel, we're always up for a conversation, and we have good. I think that the key here is what I've learned is even folks that we would consider competitors, everyone has something good to offer. Everyone has something good to bring to the conversation. So it's not always a champion challenge type environment. It's really collaborative.
Not the Thunderdome, right, Tom?
No, it's not. It's definitely not the Thunderdome. We love to engage in dialogue, and really, again, what we're all about is helping people do business with their customers in a safe and frictionless way.
Yeah.
That's I think should be everyone's goal.
That is a really good point to end on. And that's something that I have to thank you and Heidi and the entire fraud community. I found you all you work and play very well together, even across competitive lines, which is really what this is all about, right? It's the same body of topic as compliance, for example. Like if I have a good compliance program, there are things that I can share with other people. It's not competitive, it's protective. This is, I don't want anybody to win in a competitive sense because, one person can't handle fraud and another person can't. I don't think that's fair fight. So I think everybody should lay claim to good fraud protection and because the problem with fraud is there even with synthetic, there are victims. I know you don't have a person that gets stuck with it, but these are things that hit the finance companies, it hits their bottom line, and it's not going to mean that they're going to cut prices next year if their fraud goes through the roof. So this does affect all of us. Definitely.
It does. If the fraudsters use their power for good instead of evil, I think we'd live in a lot better world.
Yeah. How's that going?
And I don't see them stopping. And what's interesting is we talk about machine learning and we haven't really touched on it today, but we talk about algorithms and machines and how things are getting so sophisticated. They're bringing the same
ammunition. That's a really great point, Tom.
I hear Heidi say this. They're bringing the same fire to the fight.
They are. Yeah, if we could build the silver bullet, I'd love to have it, but I don't conceive that being the world. I think you just have to keep adapting and sometimes the old tools work, sometimes a knife works just as well as a gun.
Yes.
So it just depends, it's wild.
Well, good stuff. Tom Algie, Heidi Hunter of IDology. Thank you both for joining us today. And it's www.idology.com. Check them out on LinkedIn as well. Follow them and you can stay up to date on all the updates that they push out. It's a great organization, great people, as you can tell. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Joel.
Thanks, Joel.